I was the last one to be called into the lawyer's office. Everyone else had already come out smiling, my cousins, my aunts, even my dad. They clutched envelopes stuffed with checks and deeds, laughing quietly in the hallway like they just won the lottery. My cousin Jake got Grandpa's vintage Mustang. Aunt Robin got the lake house. Dad received a hefty chunk of cash and some stocks. Everyone walked away richer, their grief somehow lightened by the weight of money. But when it was finally my turn, the room felt colder. The lawyer, a tired-looking man with silver-rimmed glasses, gave me a look I couldn't quite read, somewhere between pity and apology. "Harper," he said, motioning for me to sit. "Your grandfather left you something different." My heart sank. I wasn't expecting anything major. Grandpa and I had been close, but he was a quiet man. We didn't talk much beyond our shared love for tinkering in the garage. Still, something in the liar's tone made my palms sweat. He slid a small, dusty item across the desk. A battered, rusty old toolbox. The kind that had probably seen decades of use. The red paint chipped and the metal latches stiff with age. "This is it?" I asked, trying not to sound ungrateful. The lawyer nodded. "That's what he left you. And this." He handed me a handwritten note folded neatly in a plain envelope. My name was on the front in Grandpa's blocky handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. "Harper, you were always the one who listened, even when you didn't understand. This old box means more than you know. Take your time. The truth isn't always loud, but it waits patiently. Love, Grandpa." I stared at the note, confused. Everyone else got money, property, things that made sense. I got a toolbox and a cryptic message. When I stepped out into the hallway, I could feel the stares. My cousin Jake smirked. "Guess he thought you needed to fix something, huh?" Maybe he thought she couldn't be trusted with real money, Aunt Robin added with a fake sweet smile. She was always the artsy one. I didn't respond. I didn't cry either. I just nodded, held the toolbox close to my chest, and walked out of that office like it weighed more than gold. Back at home, I placed it on my desk. It looked so out of place among my sketchbooks and watercolors. I stared at it for what felt like hours. I wasn't ready to open it. It wasn't about the money, okay, maybe a little, but mostly it was about what it meant. Why would Grandpa leave me something so small, so strange? I kept thinking about his last few months, how distant he seemed, how he'd sometimes start to say something and stop mid-sentence, like he was holding back, like there was something he wanted to tell me but couldn't. The next day, I finally flipped the latches open. The creak of old metal echoed in my room. Inside were rows of tools, old and worn. A wrench with his initials scratched into the handle. A cracked measuring tape. A small flashlight with half-dead batteries. And underneath all that, a stack of letters tied together with string. There were dozens of them. Yellowed with age, the handwriting was small and careful. They were addressed to someone named Elena. My heart skipped. I had never heard that name before. Not in our family, not in the stories Grandpa used to tell. I untied the string and unfolded the top letter. "Elena, I don't know if you'll ever read this. They won't let me see you. Not even one photo. They say it's better this way. That we'll all heal faster if I just forget. But I can't. I won't. You are mine. You are mine. I think about you every day. I hope you're happy. I hope you're safe. Love always. Your dad." I dropped the letter like it burned my hands. Your dad? What? Was Grandpa writing to someone else's child? Not my dad. Not any of my cousins. Someone I'd never heard of. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just a bunch of old memories. This was a secret. A big one. I read through 3 more letters before I had to stop. They were all written over several years. Some sounded hopeful, others were full of pain. But all of them were written to Elena. Then, tucked in the side of the box, I found a photo. It was small, creased at the edges and faded from time, but still clear enough to see. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, with dark curls and eyes just like Grandpa's. She was standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, maybe in her 30s, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her arm was around the child protectively. Behind them was a house I didn't recognize. The back of the photo said, Elena, 1972. That couldn't be right. Grandpa would have been in his 20s back then. Still married to my grandmother. Still raising my dad. I sat on my floor, everything spinning. I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew my history. But now I was holding proof that there was an entire piece of my grandfather's life that had been buried, erased from the family tree. And somehow, I was the only one he trusted to find it. The next day, I went back to the garage, the one place where Grandpa and I had always felt close. I sat there on the floor next to the old workbench where we used to fix bikes and take apart broken radios. I held the toolbox in my lap and cried quietly. I missed him. I missed us. But I also couldn't ignore the questions rising in my chest like waves. Who was Elena? Where was she now? Why had Grandpa been forbidden from seeing her? And why had no one ever spoken about her? Then I noticed something I hadn't before. The bottom of the toolbox had a false layer, barely visible unless you looked closely. My fingers found the edge and pried it loose. Underneath was a single, small key taped to a note. If you've come this far, Harper, you're ready. The answers are in the lake house attic. But be careful. Some truths don't stay quiet forever. The lake house. The same one Aunt Robin had just inherited. The same one we hadn't been to in years. Suddenly, this wasn't just a mystery. It was a mission. And I was about to uncover something that might tear our family apart. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the letters, the photo, and that little key. I turned it over in my hand 100 times, wondering what it could unlock. Grandpa had said the answers were at the lake house, in the attic. But that place had been practically abandoned for years, until Aunt Robin got the deed. And she wasn't exactly thrilled about visitors. The next morning, I packed my backpack and took the earliest bus out of town. I didn't even tell my parents. They wouldn't have believed me. Or worse, they'd try to stop me. Whatever this was, it felt personal, like Grandpa had chosen me for a reason. It took 2 hours and 3 transfers to get to the lake house, and by the time I arrived, the sky had gone gray with storm clouds. The house looked the same as I remembered, weathered, quiet, and sitting just a few feet from the water's edge. The porch sagged a little more than it used to. The shutters needed painting. But the silence was what hit me the hardest. I used to love this place. Summers with Grandpa on the dock, roasting marshmallows, falling asleep to the sound of crickets. Back when things still felt simple. Back when I thought I knew who my family was. I crept around to the back door. It was locked, of course, but the old window above the kitchen sink was still loose, just like it had always been. I climbed through carefully, heart pounding like I was breaking into someone else's life. Because in a way, I was. The inside of the lake house smelled like dust and old wood. Furniture covered in sheets. Cobwebs in corners. It was like time had stopped here. I moved slowly, avoiding the floorboards I knew would creak. My flashlight flickered against the walls as I found the narrow stairs leading up to the attic. It took me a few minutes to find the keyhole Grandpa had mentioned. It was hidden behind a stack of boxes in the back corner beneath a loose panel. My hands shook as I slid the key in. It turned with a soft click. The panel popped open, revealing a small wooden chest, maybe the size of a showbox. I pulled it out carefully and placed it on the attic floor. Inside was a stack of documents, more photos, and another letter, this one thicker and sealed in wax. I broke the seal and unfolded the pages. Harper, if you're reading this, it means you found everything I left behind. And I need you to understand something, this secret. It isn't just about me. It's about you. Elena was my daughter. My first daughter. She was born in 1972, the result of a love that was never accepted by my family. Her mother, Maria, was everything to me, bright, beautiful, fierce. But she wasn't what my parents wanted. She wasn't white. Back then, people didn't say things out loud, but you knew. The looks, the whispers, the threats. When Maria got pregnant, I was ready to leave everything behind. But my parents gave me a choice: leave her or lose everything. I was 23, afraid, and I made the worst mistake of my life. I left. They paid Maria to disappear, moved her to another state. They made sure I couldn't find her. But I did find her, once, in a small town in Tennessee. She had Elena with her. I saw them from across the street. I wanted to run to them, but Maria just shook her head and walked away. I never saw her again. After that, I kept writing letters. Hundreds. And then, I met your grandmother. I tried to move on, built a new life, had a son, your father. But I never forgot. I never stopped mourning the family I lost. And Harper, I think you're the only one in this family who might understand what that kind of love and pain does to a person. You always ask the questions no one else dared to. You saw me. So I'm trusting you with the truth now. Elena is out there. I don't know where. But this box holds everything I ever found: her last known address, old photos, newspaper clippings. She might have children of her own, which means you might have family you've never met. I'm sorry I kept this from everyone, but I hope you'll find a way to bring the truth into the light. With all my love, Grandpa. I couldn't move for a while after I finished reading. It was too much. Too big. My grandfather, my kind, quiet, dependable grandfather, had an entire life he'd been forced to bury. A daughter. A woman he loved. A family he lost because of pressure, racism, fear. And now, it was mine to carry. I opened the rest of the documents. There were old driver's licenses, a birth certificate, postmarked envelopes addressed to towns in Tennessee and Georgia, a school photo of Elena at about age 10, dark eyes, tight curls, and the same quiet intensity Grandpa had. There was even a local newspaper article from the early 2000s. Local nurse wins award for community work in Atlanta. The woman in the picture was older, but unmistakable. Elena. Her last name was Ramirez now. The article said she worked at a community clinic in East Atlanta. That was my next destination. I snuck out of the lake house the same way I came in. The sun had set, and the sky was streaked with gold and purple. As I walked toward the road, backpack heavier than ever, I knew nothing about my family would ever feel the same again. And honestly, neither would I, because somewhere out there was someone who shared my blood. Someone who grew up thinking their father didn't want them. And it was time someone told her the truth. It took me 3 days to get to Atlanta. I didn't tell my parents I was going. I left a note saying I needed time to clear my head after Grandpa's funeral and that I'd be staying with a friend from school. It was only half a lie. I took the Greyhound overnight, sat near the back with my headphones in, heart pounding every time the bus made a stop. I barely slept, flipping through the same documents over and over like they'd change. Like they'd tell me what to say when I finally found her. Elena Ramirez. My aunt. A woman I had never met, but who had lived in my grandfather's heart for over 40 years. The community clinic was tucked between two old buildings on a narrow street in East Atlanta. It was small, nothing fancy, just a brick storefront with a faded sign that read Sunrise Family Health. I stood across the street for 20 minutes just staring at it, my feet glued to the sidewalk, every cell in my body screaming that I wasn't ready. What was I even supposed to say? Hi, I'm your niece. Surprise. Your dad, my grandpa, never stopped loving you, even though the world tried to erase you. And he left me a rusty toolbox filled with secrets to find you. I almost turned back, but then the door opened. A woman stepped out, holding a clipboard and talking to one of the nurses. She looked older than in the photo from the newspaper, but her eyes were exactly like Grandpa's. That same quiet thoughtfulness. The same way of scanning the world like she was always trying to understand it before stepping into it. My breath caught. It was her. Elena. I didn't approach her that day. I couldn't. I watched from behind a bus stop as she helped an elderly woman into a van and waved goodbye with a smile that broke something open in my chest. She didn't know me, didn't know I existed. But in that moment, she felt more familiar to me than half the people in my own family. I followed her for the next 2 days, not in a creepy way, just gathering courage, watching her routine. She lived in a small townhouse not far from the clinic. She liked chai lattes from the coffee shop on the corner. She always gave her leftovers to a homeless man near the bus stop. She lived quietly, kindly, and alone. There were no photos of family in her windows. No kids running out the door in the morning. No husband picking her up. Just her. On the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the clinic and asked for an appointment with Elena Ramirez. The receptionist raised an eyebrow. She's our director. Is this about work? No, I said, my voice shaking. It's personal. She stared at me for a second too long, but finally made a call. Ms. Ramirez? Someone here to see you. Says it's personal. It paused. Then she nodded. She'll be right with you. Have a seat. When Elena came out, she didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. Why would she? She looked tired, but kind, her white coat buttoned neatly over a navy blouse. Hi, I'm Elena. What can I help you with? I stood up, suddenly dizzy. I think I'm your niece, I blurted. She froze. I'm Harper, I continued quickly. My grandfather was Charles Bennett. Her expression didn't change at first. She just stared at me like I was speaking a different language. Then something flickered in her eyes. Something sharp and painful. I think he was your father, I said, my voice cracking. And he wanted you to know the truth. We sat in her office in silence for nearly 10 minutes. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just listened as I poured everything out, the letters, the photo, the key, the box. I showed her the envelope he left me, the copy of her birth certificate, the photo of her and Maria from 1972. When I handed it to her hands trembled. I haven't seen this picture since I was 5, she whispered. My mom used to keep it hidden in a book. I thought it was gone. Her voice broke then, just for a second. She always told me he left us. That he didn't want me. That he chose them. I nodded, eyes filling. He didn't. They forced him. His parents threatened to cut him off if he didn't end things with your mom. He tried to find you. He wrote you hundreds of letters. He kept everything. He never forgot. Elena sat back, covering her mouth with her hand. Her eyes filled slowly, painfully, like it hurt just to feel. Then, quietly, she said, he used to whistle a song. I couldn't remember the name, just the sound. I hear it sometimes in my dreams. My mom never whistled, and she wouldn't let me ask questions. So I thought I made it up. I pulled out Grandpa's old pocket radio from my backpack, the one he used in the garage. I charged it the night before, unsure why I brought it. I pressed play, and there it was. That old jazz tune he used to hum while fixing bikes. The one he played every time we worked together. Elena broke down. She cried like a dam had finally burst. Decades of confusion, abandonment, and unanswered questions flooding out in a storm of quiet sobs. And I cried with her. Because it was so unfair. All of it. We spent the rest of the day going through everything. She told me about her childhood, how her mom worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, how she was always told to be quiet, not to ask questions, how she grew up thinking her father had chosen another life without her. I hated him for a long time, she admitted softly. Even after Mom died. Even after I learned how cruel the world could be to people like us, I held on to that hate. I thought it was all I had left of him. But it wasn't, I whispered. You had him, even if you didn't know it. He never stopped loving you. She smiled through tears. And now, I have you. That night, we sat on her couch sharing Chinese takeout and looking through photo albums. I told her stories about Grandpa, how he used to sneak me cookies during family dinners, how he taught me how to fix a leaky pipe, how he'd sometimes stare off into space like he was remembering someone he couldn't reach. He was remembering you, I said. She nodded, eyes glassy. And I realized then that family isn't just the people who raise you. Sometimes, it's the people you fight to find. The ones who never stopped loving you, even in silence. I stayed with Elena for the rest of the week. We didn't tell anyone. Not yet. It felt like we were building a bridge between two lives that had never been allowed to connect. And every story, every shared memory, was another board laid between us. We cooked together, laughed over how similar our handwriting was. I showed her how Grandpa had taught me to solder a broken wire using an old toaster, and she showed me a photo of her in a Girl Scout sash, grinning with the same crooked smile he used to have. But all the while, we knew the silence wouldn't last forever. Eventually, the rest of the family would have to know. Especially my dad. I called him the next morning. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. Hey, I said quietly. Can we talk? Harper? He asked, clearly shocked. Where are you? We've been calling. Your mom is worried sick. What's going on? I found something, I said. Something Grandpa left me. And I think you deserve to know. He hesitated. What do you mean? So I told him. Everything. About the letters. The photos. The key. About Elena. About Maria. About the truth Grandpa had hidden all his life. At first, there was silence on the other end. Then my dad let out a shaky laugh. This is insane. Are you hearing yourself right now? Dad never mentioned any of this. Not once. Because he was ashamed, I said, my voice trembling. Because he was forced to choose. His parents gave him an ultimatum. And he lived with that guilt every single day. No, Dad snapped. No. He chose us. He raised me. He didn't just walk away. He was there. For me. I know he was, I said gently. But he also carried the weight of leaving her. And it crushed him. You're telling me I have a sister? He said, almost mocking now. You think that's something he would have hidden for 50 years? Yes, I said firmly. Because he was afraid of how you'd react. Just like this. He hung up. I stared at the screen, my chest hollow. I had expected anger. Confusion. But not that complete rejection. He called back 2 days later. This time, his voice was colder. You need to stop. This story. This. Fantasy. It's going to ruin people's lives. Dad's gone. Let it rest. I can't, I said. Because he didn't want it to rest. He wanted her to know. He left it all for me. Not you. Not Aunt Robin. Me. Dad exhaled like I was exhausting him. And what do you want, Harper? To bring this woman to the next family reunion? To pretend like nothing ever happened? No, I whispered. I want the truth to matter. I want his truth to matter. The fallout started slowly. My parents refused to talk about it. Aunt Robin said I was being manipulated. My cousins rolled their eyes and joked that I was chasing ghosts. Everyone was more worried about protecting Grandpa's reputation than honoring his real story. But Elena didn't ask for any of this. She didn't ask to be hidden. She didn't ask to be erased. And now, I wasn't going to let that happen. We decided to go back to the lake house. Together. Elena had never been there. She said the thought of standing in a space where she'd been forgotten made her sick. But now, with the truth in the open, it felt like a step we both needed to take. The drive was quiet, tense. We passed stretches of forest and winding roads, neither of us speaking until the water finally came into view. Elena parked the car and just stared. I never thought I'd see this place, she whispered. We walked in through the front door like ghosts returning to a home they never knew. Dust coated the counters. Light filtered through cracked blinds. But to Elena, it was sacred ground. She stood in Grandpa's old study and ran her fingers along the bookshelves. This is where he read to you? She asked softly. I nodded. Every summer. She picked up one of his old paperbacks. To Kill a Mockingbird. She opened the cover and gasped. Inside was a note. For Elena. One day, I hope you read this and know I loved you fiercely, even when I wasn't allowed to show it. Dad. She crumpled to the floor, sobbing. And I sat beside her, holding her hand. We spent hours in that house. She went through his closet, found his flannel shirts, pressed them to her face like she was trying to remember a scent she never got to know. She found the workbench in the garage, ran her fingers along the same grooves I used to trace when I was small. We listened to his old records, sat in silence, and watched the sun set over the lake he loved so much. And I realized something. Love doesn't always come wrapped in the neat packages people expect. Sometimes, it's broken, messy, hidden, but that doesn't make it any less real. We left the lake house with a new plan. If the family didn't want to listen, we'd make them hear anyway. We contacted a local historian who ran a community storytelling project. We shared Grandpa's letters, the photos, and Elena's story. She helped us write a personal essay, a tribute to the life that had been buried, and published it in the local paper. The headline read, A Daughter Forgotten, The Hidden Life of Charles Bennett. It went viral within days. The clinic where Elena worked received dozens of messages, some cruel, most kind. People wrote in with stories of their own families, of secrets and silences and the damage they do. Even people in my own town, kids from school, neighbors, approached me with tears in their eyes. Your story, it made me ask my dad about his brother. I didn't know other people went through this too. You're brave for telling the truth. But my family? They still didn't call. That was okay. Because the truth was out there now. And truth doesn't need permission to exist. 6 months passed. Fall turned to winter. Then to spring. The story stayed online, still quietly shared, still leaving ripples in places I couldn't see. I went back to school. Elena went back to her clinic. Life moved forward, but it was never the same. Because now, I knew the truth, and it lived with me. Every day. In the way I asked deeper questions in class. In the way I wrote my essays with more honesty. In the way I looked at old family photos, not just seeing the people in them, but noticing who wasn't there. Some stories start with love. Some with pain. Ours started with silence. But it didn't end there. One Saturday morning, I was sketching in my bedroom when I heard my phone buzz. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. Hello? There was a pause. Then a voice, worn but steady. Is this Harper? Yes, I said cautiously. This is Maria. I froze. Elena's mother, she added softly. Elena gave me your number. I couldn't breathe for a second. Hi, I finally managed. I just wanted to thank you, she said, for telling the story, for giving my daughter back the part of her life she never got to know. My eyes filled instantly. I didn't do anything special. I just followed the truth. That's more than most people ever do, she said. And I thought you should know, your grandfather wasn't lying when he said he loved her. He came to see us once. I was angry. I told him to leave. But he cried, Harper. He cried like he'd never be whole again. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, tears slipping down my cheeks. I'm sorry I kept her from him, she said quietly. I didn't want her growing up with a family that didn't want her. I understand, I said. But I want you to know she's not alone anymore. Maria's voice broke. Thank you. We talked for another 10 minutes about the past, about Elena's childhood, about how much had been lost. But somehow, even in the heaviness of it all, it didn't feel sad. It felt like healing. The next time I visited Elena, she wasn't alone. Maria opened the door. She hugged me before saying a word. And in that moment, something clicked, like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. I had never seen this version of family before. One made from broken branches and hidden roots. But it felt real. Maybe even more real than the picture-perfect one I thought I had. That night, we sat around the dinner table, me, Elena, and Maria, passing bowls of rice and roasted vegetables, telling stories, laughing at things that didn't even make sense unless you lived through all the cracks. You know, Elena said, refilling my glass, he would have loved this. Us. Together. I smiled. I think he does. A few months later, I stood on the edge of the lake house dock, staring out at the water. I came alone this time. I brought the toolbox. It was still scratched and rusted, still held the weight of secrets, but it had become something else now, something sacred. I sat down, opened it, and pulled out the last letter I had saved. One Grandpa had written and never mailed. It had no date. Just a line across the top that read, "In case I never get the chance to say this out loud." I unfolded it and read it softly into the wind. I don't know if I'll ever be forgiven. I don't expect to be. But I hope you know, Elena. Not a day has gone by that I didn't think about you. I've watched your smile in old photographs. Traced your face with my fingers, wondering if you'd grown to look like your mother or me. I want you to know that you are not forgotten. You were never forgotten. And if anyone finds this someday, Harper, maybe, I hope they carry the truth forward, even if it hurts. Because the truth is the only way we get free. I folded the letter back into the box, closed the lid, and hugged it to my chest. Then I stood up and whispered, "You're free now." And for the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't long before my parents finally reached out. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But one day, my dad called and asked if we could talk. We met at a diner halfway between our cities. He looked older, somehow, like the weight of the truth had finally caught up to him. "I read the article," he said. "Every word." I waited. He stared at his coffee, then added, "I don't know how to process any of it." "You don't have to," I replied. "You just have to acknowledge that it happened." "I was so angry," he said. "Not at you. At him. At everything. For not telling me. For putting this burden on you." "He trusted me," I said. "That wasn't a burden. That was a gift." He nodded slowly. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. "Grandpa's old wristwatch. I found it in the garage," he said. "Thought maybe you'd want it." I took it in my hands, my throat tight. It was still ticking. The family still doesn't talk much about Elena. Or Maria. They pretend like the article was just a phase I went through. Some of them whisper. Others just stay quiet. But that's okay. Because the silence no longer holds power over us. We rewrote the ending. Elena and I now talk every week. Sometimes about work. Sometimes about boys. Sometimes about the quiet grief of what could have been. She sends me photos of Maria's garden. I send her sketches of places I want us to travel together. We made a scrapbook, each page a piece of Grandpa's life, reassembled with the truth. We're still building that bridge. And every step we take, I can feel him with us. Not as a ghost, but as the man he truly was. The one no one else ever really saw. But I did. So if you're hearing this now, and you've ever felt like your family's story didn't make sense, if you've ever felt like something was missing, or broken, or buried too deep to reach, don't give up. Dig deeper. Ask questions. Open the box, even if it's rusty. Because the truth might not change the past, but it can absolutely change your future.